This is an oral history interview for the Institute for Latino Studies at the University of Notre Dame. Today is July 12th, 2007. We're in room 208 in McKenna Hall, and I'm talking with Ramiro Rodriguez. Ramiro, thank you so much for agreeing to participate in our program. And for cataloging purposes, would you please state your full name and date of birth?
Ramiro Rodriguez, April 24th, 1965.
Thank you. Could you tell us a little bit about your personal background, where you grew up, your family, and how you became interested in art?
I grew up in Fenville, Michigan, which is about an hour and a half from South Bend.
Fenville?
Fenville.
Uh-huh.
And I'm one of a family of 11 siblings. My parents came to me in about 1960 and settled in Fenville. And so I grew up there, lived all my life there until I moved away for school. As far as art interest, it started early, just an interest in drawing, and I think it started with like comic books and things like that. Noticing that I had some ability to do it. There was always a group of, in the close-knit family of cousins and siblings that were usually drawing something, so it became part of something we did whenever we were together, and it just grew from there. I think I realized I was good at doing drawing when an older brother had me draw something for him in high school for his art class, something that he couldn't quite finish himself. And I was surprised that he was asking me, and then I realized that, yeah, I could do it. So I think that's where it really became clear to me that I could do something with art.
And so you went to college to study fine arts?
Yeah, I graduated from Fenville Public High School and took a couple of years off before I attended Kendall College of Art and Design in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I studied there for 5 years, switched majors. I thought I was going to do commercial illustration, but realized it wasn't really what I wanted to do. I noticed that I really didn't like having set the parameters set by someone else for what I was going to draw or paint. And so I just, Kendall had a different department called Fine Arts that was kind of the catch-all for printmaking, painting, sculpture, photography. And so I just went into that, concentrated on that. So I graduated in 1990 with BFA in Fine Arts. And from there, I took a year off and then attended the University of Cincinnati in Ohio and studied painting there for 2 years. And graduated from there with a master's in fine arts in painting.
Were there professors or mentors there that you sort of...
Yeah, well, I think more so at Kendall than, I mean, there are people that influenced me at Cincinnati, but I think it was in, well, actually in high school and junior high, I had the same art teacher, Susan Park, who was a big influence, partly because we were both Beatle fanatics, so we had something in common, but she also nurtured not only my own, but a few of my cousins' artistic abilities, and really kind of nurtured us along the way, kept us at it. And well, she suggested Kendall. I really had no idea. Having not many of my older siblings had attended college, or if they had attended, hadn't attended for very long. So I was really in the dark about what to do, how to get in there. And she suggested the art school. Kendall was close by. It was 45 minutes Fenville and Grand Rapids. And I applied there, and it was the only school I applied to, and I got in with the portfolio I had, and went there. So she was a big influence in taking that step. And once at Kendall, there were a few instructors that really hit it off with. Deborah Rockman, who's a figurative drafts person, and also multimedia artist. She was a very influential teacher there, professor. David Greenwood was a sculptor there that I was a studio assistant for. And so I worked closely with him, and I think through working closely with him, I learned some of the business aspects of being an artist, as far as, you know, keeping resumes and slides and things together. Whenever he would go out to set up a show, he'd always take a few extra packets, or, you know, it was things like that that came in handy, seeing how he went about doing it. And since he had been doing it for so long, that it was good to see. Because otherwise I probably wouldn't have thought of doing those types of things. So that was a good. He was a good mentor. Help. There were a few other professors that were pretty beneficial to the way I was thinking. That weren't necessarily in the studio arts program. There's John McCaffrey, who I think was a Notre Dame alum. Who taught mythology and literature, and that was a big influence on my work. So we became friends even after college, after I was done there, as well as Deb Rockman as well. We still keep in touch and compare what we're doing. So I think those two have been big influences. Mm-hmm. At Cincinnati, well, I took a little bit from everyone, but it was a much more concentrated area with the grad students. I think we learned more from each other than we did from any particular professor there. So I think my classmates at UC were the biggest influence.
How about looking like beyond your colleagues and your peers? When did you start to look out, like what was going on, in I guess in on the international scene, but also like across in California or New York, or how did that fit into?
Well, I was growing up in Fenville, which is a very small population. I didn't have a big art wasn't, or should I say, there wasn't a big influence of any outside artists in there. So what I got was, I kind of gleaned from magazines or art magazine. Well, if I could come across the art magazine, but basically any reproductions that would come along. So there wasn't a whole lot of input there. I didn't really know a whole lot about art beyond the limited things we had been taught at high school or junior high. Once I was in Grand Rapids, and there's the art museums and galleries, and then through the professors started learning more about, well, basic art history, but also just what was going on in the art world at the time that I was in school. So it wasn't until I got away from home, so about '85, that I really started paying attention to what was going on. As far as some of the influences that I have now, especially the Chicano artists, Latino artists, it wasn't really until I got here to Notre Dame, met Gil, that that whole world opened up. Mostly because of his influence. I mean, his collection, and learning about his collection, and then having the different interactions with him and other artists, the artists he brings in, through the university or through the SNITE where I work. So that has grown quite a bit.
So you studied paint. When did you start printmaking? I mean, how does that all work together in your work, the painting and printmaking?
Well, I did some printmaking in high school. We did linoleum blocks. Re Sort of basic, but also there were some multicolored reductive block printing that we did there. So that was my first experience with printmaking and painting. We did painting in class as well. But and I've never seen myself as just one or the other. It just happens, whatever's at hand. However the image seems to come to me, that I'll work in it. So I was mainly a painter at UC, even though I had taken classes at Kendall in the basic techniques of different medium. In printmaking, we did intaglio, we did litho, we did relief printing. So we tried a little bit of everything, but I never dove into it further than that. I just did the basic intro classes. Once at UC, I had intended to take a relief class, but ended up doing mezzotints instead because I happened to come across an exhibit of Tissot prints, and he had mezzotints, and I remember going back to my professor and asking what that process was because I'd never heard of it, and I liked the qualities of it. And so he showed me mezzotint. So instead of relief, I ended up doing mezzotint throughout his class, Jim Williams at UC. And it wasn't until, and my major is painting, so I continued with the painting and doing a few mezzotints. It wasn't until I was out of the graduate program on my own that I didn't have a studio space, and I had spare wood from the job I was doing at the Contemporary Arts Center, building, doing exhibition work, that I started doing printmaking again because it was easy to do. I had the scrap wood. I didn't have to buy anything, and I could do it in my apartment without too much hassle. So that's how I got into printmaking more regularly. And it just kind of kept growing from there. I went back to painting. The prints and the images in the prints informed the painting, and then the painting would inform the images in the prints. And so I go back and forth depending on how much time I have, how much studio space, and what the ideas are. Mm-hmm. So I don't see myself as just one or the other. It's whatever comes and is needed, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Since we're talking about printmaking, you've been in the Taller Consejo that Gil started
right.
with printmakers from all across the country.
Right.
I think since it began. Can you talk a little bit about the beginnings of that and what it does? And who's in it?
I'll try. Well, I was invited by Gil. I think because he knew I was a printmaker, as well as my ties with the Snipe Museum here on campus. And now it's called the Consejo Gráfico. It's a consortium of printmakers and print workshops, primarily Latino, Chicano print shops that are, what's the purpose? Well, I think the mission is to create this consortium of print shops, print houses that will help one another with their experience, with the combined experience in marketing and in just information, but also in keeping ties with some of the newer generations, older generations of printmakers that are in this country. And I don't think there really has been anything that big, and I think Gil's foresight in seeing that this could be beneficial to all if there was some sort of communication between all these various groups. I mean, there's people, Taller Boricua in New York, there's Coronado in Austin, Texas, for instance. Right, Sam Coronado. There's Self-Help Graphics and Ramiro Rodriguez's La Mano Press also, which is now in Mexico. He's recently moved to Mexico, back to Mexico. So there's the combined efforts of trying to get projects together for all the people involved in those groups. My place in it is kind of odd. I'm kind of sponsored through Latino Studies or through Notre Dame, but I don't necessarily have my own taller as everyone else does. So I'm kind of the oddball in there. But I'm glad to be a part of it. There's some really great, it's a really great opportunity for me to meet a lot of these printmakers that have been doing this for a very long time, and a lot of these people who were the spearhead people of Chicano movement and art.
So older generation
right.
Group, right?
There is, yeah. Malaquias Montoya, who's a big influence on me when Gil brought him up to teach here for a year. I took his screen printing class, and that's where I first learned to do that. And so he's been a good friend and very knowledgeable in the history and philosophy and of the Chicano movement, and so that's been a big help to me, who didn't know a whole lot about it prior to coming here. So that's a consejo. In some respects, there's more to it, but it also works on projects trying to inform the Latino public of, for instance, AIDS awareness. There was a campaign of using images for an AIDS awareness poster campaign, and also an obesity campaign, which is the current project.
It kind of fits in with the whole printmaking, doing printmaking for social and
right,
issues and betterment.
Yeah. So it's still keeping with the whole kind of Chicano poster movement philosophy of informing the public through a quick medium and relatively low-cost medium and multiples. So, which also ties back to the Mexican idea of the taller gráfico popular. So there's a lot of playing with history and knowing history and moving forward with it.
I have a question about identity. How do you think about identity? Do you, in your work and as an artist, in terms of being Latino or just an artist, is there any? Do you have thoughts on that?
Well, for a long time I didn't think of any sort of identity. I just did what I did. I think there's been outside influences that have, that would want to, because it's easier to categorize someone, or someone's art. So there's been influences of, saying you're a Latino artist, or you're, I wouldn't call myself a Chicano artist because I'm, based on the philosophy that my work, it doesn't really fall into that category. But yeah, so for a long time I didn't associate myself with any identity. I just thought I'm doing what I'm doing. But I realize that now that there's always been the influence of my own heritage in it, and I can't get away from it. I'm not fighting it. It's going to show up, and I think, it's not for me to really try to build that identity. I think someone else will figure it out, or put it in some sort of class down the road. But I don't really worry about it necessarily.
You think that realization maybe comes with age, and as you kind of?
Well,
I don't know.
I don't know, because I thought early on, early on when people started asking in college, I would say no, just flat out no, that I wasn't trying to be a Latino artist, or I wasn't trying to be anything. Um, just an artist. I was trying to be a good painter or a good printmaker. So I'm not sure that it is with age as much as just, I guess, just realizing, coming to terms that some people are going to have the need to try to categorize in one way or another, and I can either go along or just not care about it.
Do that based on the work they're looking at, or your name and you.
Yeah, it's hard to say because I can't separate myself from it. I mean, my name's there. It's obviously a Latino name, and the work. I mean, depending on what type of work I'm doing at the time, or what imagery, I don't think. To me, it doesn't seem. I don't associate it with being one or the other, or that you could pinpoint it. But that could be me. Someone else it might be obvious to someone else. But like I said, I haven't really analyzed it that much. I think if I start doing that, then I'll be too self-conscious. I think the work won't be as good if I'm trying to be one or the other. So I just need to block it out.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about some of your paintings and some of the things I looked at recently.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of family and
Yeah.
I mean, it just seems like
it's
what's coming from you.
Right. I've always tried to just keep it to being what I know, things that are happening in my life or that I'm associating with at the time, and I think that's the only way. Well, that's the only way that works for me, so that it feels honest, so that it feels like I have something to say, and it's when I try to. I think that's also part of the reason why I didn't go into illustration was that trying to have someone else's message presented. For me, I really have to have something staked in that idea for it to excite me, to inspire me to make something. And if it isn't there, then the work will show it that I wasn't interested. So I'd rather not do it.
Can you talk a little bit about your own art, your technique, and I'm thinking about the paintings that you looked at.
Yeah. Well, the paintings. Well, I guess my influences in painting, like I said, growing up, not having a big exposure or wide exposure to art. The stuff that I did see was reproductions, like say in Bibles, which were usually the masters' paintings of biblical themes. A lot of Rembrandt, a lot of Rubens, or those types of paintings, the masters' sort of religious works. So I think that influenced my wanting to be a figurative artist, and also influenced my technique of, I tend to use dramatic lighting, kind of darker palettes for the paintings anyways, more sort of psychological environments and situations, and I think that comes from growing up looking at those sort of paintings, and I always wanted my paintings to look like an old master's painting, as much as I could, to my ability, get to, and that's an ongoing thing. There's always like the push and pull on that as well, as far as technique growing or doing something else. For the prints, I was, I think that as far as technique on the prints, the influence there had been, once again, things that I looked at as a kid. So I remember coming across M.C. Escher prints, also seeing woodblock prints by Durer or Holbein, not Holbein, seeing etchings by Rembrandt, and that influencing what I wanted to see, especially the Escher things, which were just fantastic to me, and also very meticulous, and I always wondered how you could do that with wood, and understanding the process. So I think that's influenced how I make an image or how I construct an image. But then the subject matter is usually, I think that's just kind of grown out of, well, the same place the paintings come from, so it would be more of a psychological point of view. Now they're changing more as I'm getting older and have a family. It's taking a different turn, whereas before they were, maybe I was thinking a little wider in scope of ideas, and now there's still wider ideas, but they're centered around family groups and interactions, relations. So I think there's that now. So it's always morphing into something else. So like the painting is also changing. The recent paintings have more of a, I'd say more of a color sense, and I think that's the influence of seeing more of the Latino art. People that I've admired, stuff that I had seen and didn't know who had done it, and now I'm realizing who they are. And like Cesar Martinez has an influence on just the way he uses color in my work. Knowing Malachias and talking to him and seeing how he works has influenced how I was doing prints as well.
Can you describe that a little bit?
Well, I think with Malachias it's more of a philosophy of just hearing him. I mean, knowing Malachias, he's a very strong personality that is very dedicated to the way I see it, is very dedicated to the issues of helping people and trying to make social change through artwork or getting the message out through artwork. And so that, that's something that I grapple with. It's like, okay, do I need to do that? Do I, my work doesn't necessarily do that. How do I incorporate it? Do I need to incorporate it? So it's just, it's influenced me in just getting me to think of, why I'm doing art, why I need to do art. Is it necessary to do the type of art that I'm doing? So I think with Malachias, it's more of that sort of influence. With other artists, like, it's either their technique or, just their method of working. Cesar Martinez, I just love his sense of color, his sense of breaking out compositions, the broad kind of color fields in some of his earlier pieces of the men in suits or the women, in front of a colorful background. There's various other people that aren't Latino artists that have influenced me too. There's current Norwegian painter Odd Nerdum, who does these fantastic paintings that are in the style of Rembrandt or an old master type of painting, but is creating these sort of post-apocalyptic landscapes with people in it, and very odd sort of compositions. So there's always that play of, with my work, I don't want it to be, even though I was influenced by, like, say, Dali as a kid, because I think everybody sees him and thinks it's fantastic, and I'm still fascinated by his work, but for me, I never wanted my work to be thought of as surrealistic, even though I may have elements that kind of push the edge of reality. I want Um, I want everything, in the paintings especially, to be possible in some way. They may seem dreamlike or it might be an odd situation, but it could happen. Um, and yeah, I forget what's going on with that.
Influences. People,
So,
you know.
so there's various influences in different ways, but those are just a few that come to mind.
You've had exhibitions across the country, in Texas, California, Kentucky, mostly in the Midwest. Do you have any sort of observations in general about, what it's like to be an artist in the Midwest versus the coasts or the Southwest, or what's distinguishing about it?
Yeah. Well, I think there's more opportunities on the coast or Southwest, and I think it's a lot harder to be an artist in the Midwest, just because of, well, if you're trying to survive on art, just monetarily wise, there's more money on the coast than there is in the Midwest. People don't usually tend to. I mean, there's a different mentality. People don't usually, unless you're in a big city, tend to buy art or think of art as something they can own. It's something that you go see at a museum or a gallery. You don't necessarily own. So I think that's tough being here. But I've never lived on any of the coasts. I've visited and I've had shows in different places, and there's also a stiffer competition, and in the bigger cities and on the coastal areas, Southwest also. So I think it would be best for an artist to be someplace like that. But for me, for the things that I need to influence my art, the Midwest is actually better. I think I'd be too distracted in other areas too. I could be wrong, but I think I would be too distracted in other areas to get work done, especially the type of work that I'm doing, which might be a good thing, but right now it's not what I need. So yes, I don't really have a whole lot to say about the other areas, having not been there or live there. I tend to show in the Midwest just because it's easier to transport some of my bigger pieces or even some of my smaller pieces. I can mail them out to shows. The prints, the paintings are tougher. I'd have to drive them out. So some of it's just logistics of trying to exhibit anywhere else.
Is there anything that I haven't asked about? Well, I guess I haven't asked you about your philosophy or your artist statement. Put you on the spot, but.
Well, right now I don't have. I used to have like a stock artist statement when I was doing the figures in water, because there was a whole. Well, there was a whole theme, and the works could be sort of encapsulated in one statement, with based on why I was using water. And now, since I haven't been doing that lately, that statement's out the door. So yeah. So now I think my basic philosophy for art is really something a friend told me once, who's also a painter in Cincinnati, Jason Friends, and he said, we correspond and we call each other, email each other, and there's a few of us that are always in contact, and when we're struggling, we talk to each other, and I remember at one point, trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And his suggestion, which I thought was good, was, paint something you want to see. Look at what's out there. Look at the artwork that's there, or your world around you, and then you have this ability to create something, make that which you want to see that you don't see out there. And I think that was a good suggestion. That because my artwork tends to be about seeing the extraordinary in the simpler things, or things that you would take for granted, or something you see every day that you don't, maybe forget. One forgets what importance it has, or that there can be some spiritual effect or power in very basic acts. So I think that's part of what I want to see. So that's what I try to put into the artwork, is just for myself, and hopefully other people will see it as well. Just seeing something in your everyday world that will inspire you, or that will make you think, or question why you do something, or why it's there. So I think that's it.
Is there any advice that you would have for like a high school student who has an interest in art, or an undergrad student, or someone who's thinks they have art in their being?
Well, I would say that that if it's there in you, and it's something that you want to do, then you should do it as much. You should draw as much, or you should write as much, or play as much, if depending on what sort of art you're going into, as you can, just to create the abilities, the skills, the techniques that you need for whatever it is that you want to say. And then the other thing would be to have a wide scope of interests, so that when you do have those abilities, you do have something to say, or that it gives you something to say, and not to be too locked down to just one way of doing things or looking at things. That would probably be it.
Sounds like good advice. Is there anything that you can think of that I haven't asked you?
I don't know. I don't know what anyone else would find interesting or important to note.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate
Thanks.
taking the time to participate in this project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.